Okay, people are gonna start popping on. This is gonna be a whole lot more, conversation, not a lot of presentation, for everyone's benefit. First, before I want to jump into wholesaling, first and foremost, but before I do, I would like to, and I'm going to explain everything about wholesaling, and we're going to have a whole conversation about it. But I'd really like to know if there's any topics of conversation or questions that you would like to discuss about the NAR settlement, just so I can have them written down and prepared. Or things you'd like to see brought to help you in your business related to the settlement, or any clarification questions. We're going to keep talking about it over and over and over again until everybody is comfortable and feeling supported and confident in moving forward. So any thoughts on, yeah?
I have one question about, so if there's cooperative payout, and we normally verify that by putting the MLS in there, and if there is cooperative, it's got to be kept on the broker site, right? And so we are relying on that 100%, right? That, okay, if they put it out there, we put the MLS there,
I think there's going to be a new document introduced.
New document.
I think it's going to be a totally separate form that it may involve all parties
to sign.
Okay. Because it may or may not, because keep in mind, like our listing contract wouldn't have to change. If it would be the fact that there's no advertisement in a universally accepted format like we currently have.
Yeah.
This is total guessing, but I would imagine that our forms committee is reviewing this and saying, we need something to secure commission. And the listing agent has it secured with the seller. The buyer agent has it secured with the buyer. But if there's an exchange from the listing agent to the buyer agent, it used to exist in the MLS. And by the way, new construction, they have a form that they will provide to you to say, this is what we will pay you, because if your buyer builds on a lot that wasn't listed for sale in the MLS. So the concept already exists, just it isn't primarily used. And so I think there's going to be a form. There used to be a form, by the way, that existed between just brokers, and it was listing brokers authorization for cooperative compensation. And you could literally submit it. It was kind of like a separate piece of paperwork that you just talked with the listing. When listing commissions at one point were 3.5%, 3.15, then they went to 3, then they went to 2. They just have kept coming down, which is besides the point. But the point being is that if someone had originally thought they were going to get a 3.5, and then they showed up to this newfangled way of doing it at 2.7, a buyer agent could ask a listing agent, along with an offer, with a separate document that only went to the listing agent, and it was just executed between the listing agent and brokerage and the buyer's agent and brokerage.
Right.
So that's what I anticipate being the enforceable document or supporting info for cooperative compensation. And I would say that if we don't have that, then I'm going to be coming up with a solution for all of you guys to adopt to secure your commission. Because like right now, even an email would suffice from, if that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
From the listing agent brokerage if it's being cooperative. And no, it's not going to be as simple as a screenshot of a website, because it's not, the thing with the MLS is every activity in the MLS is trackable and kept on record. And so like right now, if you see something at 2.7 and you showed it when it was at 2.7 and you write an offer and they modified that commission, you'd have an argument to say they owe me 2.7 because when I showed it, it was 2.7. Where on a website, there wouldn't be any way of enforcing that.
That's what I was worried about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do really believe that there will be one or more forms. And I was on a broker broadcast last week, and the person that spoke was incredibly insightful and reassuring that we're going to have the tools we need to navigate this. The point being is expect new forms or more forms.
Let's go one better. So this is also going to make our buyer representation agreements so much more important.
100%.
When we take them out into the field, we're going to sign those agreements with our clients at 3.5%. Now, my question is when we're on the listing, and let's say that they agree to pay us 2.7,
Yeah,
is it or 2
Yeah.
or 1?
yeah.
What's the mechanism by which we collect the residual, but the difference between what they pay out and what our buyer broker agreement says?
So right now, it's the same way it's gonna be in the future.
Okay.
My buyer broker agreements never say less than 3%.
Okay.
Ever. And it says I will reduce what they owe me by what the MLS pays out, because that's a line item on the buyer representation agreement. And I get to choose whether or not I act on the remainder.
So, in the case you wanted to take action on that 0.3%, what mechanism would you use to collect?
Title company.
Title company and say, this is a commission expense to be charged to the buyer.
Yep.
Comp disclosure.
And comp disclosure
Comp disclosure set with the offer to the title company and.
with
to
buyer
the-
broker.
And to the lender, get it to the lender, because if you don't, if that pops up late, it's gonna be received less
But
favorably.
I would say all our forms are gonna end up being exchanged.
Okay, so here's one better.
Yep.
Can seller paid closing costs cover that?
We just got information that, see, as of right now, all the lenders are saying, they were saying no. As of Friday of last week, NAF, I think, came out and said, I'm making it up right now because I don't have the accuracy, because again, none of this goes in, everything related to the settlement. All of this clarification will come in time, maybe not timely, but in time. We will have information, but it won't go into effect until middle of July. That's what everyone's anticipating. And I lost where I was going with it. I think all of our contracts are going to be exchanged back and forth, both ways, because I think it's just going to be more information. And then what was the question?
The question was how to collect that 0.3%
Right.
from the buyer correctly.
Oh, and the
And-
title,
and-
and the lender, and how is the lender gonna regard it? On Friday, NAF put out a post and said, I'm just making it up, conventional will allow closing costs to cover comp for a buyer agent.
Okay.
I anticipate that the lending community is going to have to get behind this and support us. Otherwise, they will be equally devastated by the fallout if they don't.
Grow up or die.
Yes.
Yep.
And that's not like it is an expectation, because like honestly, we as an industry, as real estate agents, have had to do that since TRID came along, and all of we've had to adjust to. We have to work together. We're all partners in this industry. And so them coming up with some statement, like even when lenders will talk to us now and be like, well, it doesn't cover it right now. And it's like, well, moot point. When you guys
You're right.
decide that you're going to get on board with what our industry needs, because the reality, and I think that I wouldn't be surprised if conventional didn't look at their 3% max seller contributions and said 3% seller contributions in what has traditionally been considered closing costs and prepaids, and maybe 1%, 1 to 3%. I have a feeling they're going to come up with something like you can finance in your commission, because let's be honest, let's just take a step back. We're not in real estate. We're not in mortgage. We're just like buyers are financing in commission already in today's real estate transaction. And it's not just coming from the sellers, it's financed into the sales price. And because we do have scenarios and situations where buyers will come in and say, I don't want representation, I want to be discounted the 2.7, right? So I think there's going to be it's just going to be some clarification of practices that are few and far between right now.
Cool.
Can I ask a question, Alexis?
Yeah, just a second, Brooke.
Oh, go ahead.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, Brooke, go ahead.
You said that lenders will be equally devastated by this. And
Yep.
some of that I get, and some of it I'm curious about, because the I mean, the buyers will still need loans regardless of if they have buyer agents.
Yeah, and if they, okay, and let's be honest, that we've got some pretty proud and confident consumers. And we have plenty of consumers that aren't interested in being proud and confident and trying to navigate a real estate transaction on their own. I have had plenty of clients that want a real estate agent, and will that change or shift? Sure. Are lenders going to want clients to have real estate agents?
Yes, because their job's gonna get a lot harder.
Their job's gonna get a lot harder. Listing agents' job are gonna get a lot harder. I mean, if more pain is felt, yeah, more liability. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's gonna happen where you guys, are things gonna change? Yes, I think so. I do think so. And I think there's gonna be some opportunity for the industry to improve some practices and clarify some things. And I do think that by the consumers aren't necessarily going to feel super comfortable navigating transactions, especially if they're interacting with someone, a buyer agent, that can explain a value proposition, not even just for what I as an agent bring to the table, but what I as an agent related to risk mitigation, education, navigating a transaction. I've had clients where they don't have time in their life to shuffle paperwork or find a title company or even review the contracts,
You don't even know what a title company is.
or even know what a title company is. So, yes, they're gonna need loans, but the question then also as a response in, not necessarily directly to you, Brooke, but it's like, won't they need real estate agents too? Like, there still is going to be a need for what we do. And just
Especially if you're good.
And well, I mean, look at what we do already, you guys, where at least I do in my business. I work with a buyer. They tell me they have their own lender. I advocate for my lender. Guess what? Lenders, it's time to start getting on board with advocating for their agents or an agent, or, I mean, we all do it delicately. We all do it, carefully, but it's
Some of us more than others.
wait, to each their own. You all get to do your business however you want. But the point is there's a part of it where, and my lender partners, I know that in a heartbeat would be like, you really do need representation, and here's why. And they are going to be an advocate for what I do or what all of us do. Are we going to see changes? Yes. Like, I'm not trying to be pie in the sky. Probably sounds like it a little bit, but yeah, there's going to be changes.
The mechanisms already exist for closing costs to pay things that aren't really even transactionally related. In a VA purchase,
Yes.
you can ask for closing costs, and 2% of your closing costs from the seller can pay off the private debt of the buyer. Like the seller can pay off.
Non-related to qualify. Yeah, absolutely. And, or just like the VA funding fee can be added on top of your loan amount with no need for it to appraise.
And excluded from appraisal.
And excluded from appraisal. I mean, there's a part of this that we could get there. Are we going to? I have no idea. We could get there. If VA funding fee is a necessary mechanism for VA funding to even exist. And, there's going to be, these things are going to be considered. They're being discussed. Yes.
So one of the things I think I'm confused about among many is, so to get in the house, they have to have a buyer rep.
Yep.
agreement.
A conversation about representation and agency with documentation of what the consumer is comfortable with. So buyer representation doesn't mean an exclusive right to represent, and it doesn't mean a 6-month contract.
So I'm just thinking, how would it unrepresented or somebody how do they even get into the house if they're not represented?
I mean, in theory, they shouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying it kind of cuts that off with that settlement of saying nobody gets in really without some kind of,
Either the listing agent representing the seller.
Listing agent.
Listing agent representing the seller could get a buyer in that has no representation. That listing agent.
The listing agent is functionally useless to that buyer.
Correct.
Right.
And
so there's really no way for them to, I mean,
they're not going to be getting into a bunch of houses and then writing offers on their own And it's not necessarily, I mean, it's a complex settlement that does limit, I mean, Open Door maybe might beat us out, or more companies like Open Door that, you know, have vacant houses, they put a lockbox on, pull up to the sign and you get a code, you get to go in, maybe. Sure, but I mean, huh?
What could go wrong?
Oh, what could go
Letting the
wrong?
General public in.
Oh, Open Door is the scourge of
Oh, it's,
Bloomington right now.
yeah, it is. And the whole state, actually.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to clarify, because I wasn't following. You said that listing agent is gonna be functionally useless to,
What can they
They
do?
represent the seller.
they do.
They only
but-
represent the
But
seller.
there's nothing that prohibits them from going into dual agency.
They could,
Yes.
they could.
And there's nothing that prohibits them from writing an offer with an unrepresented buyer.
Absolutely,
Same as it
but
is-
functionally useless in the intent of the scheduling of the showing.
And
Just the scheduling of the showing, a listing agent can schedule a showing
Yeah.
without the obligation of having to review agency
Yeah.
and have a buyer rep agreement. If I was a listing agent, all of you would have to have the conversation with that buyer before you come into the house. I can show that buyer the house
Yes.
in a functionally useless capacity, but let them in the house. They could then go write an offer on their own. I could write with them as just a customer, still representing the seller. And the other option is I could do dual agency.
Is-
Or I could also say, I need you to work with a buyer agent because I'm not going to offer either of those options.
Is there a requirement for the listing agent to disclose anything to those unrepresented buyers?
Yes. I represent the seller. In theory, first substantive contact will still exist, but it'll be less relevant, really.
Do they need to document that the same way that we as buyers agents? would?
No. Mm-mm. No, I don't think the onus is gonna be on the listing agent in the same manner. I really don't. I don't think that there's gonna be any enforcement of it, even if they say we should. Because the practicality of that is you represent the seller, you already have a known obligation. And if you verbalize and if you say, I told them, like, there's not gonna be a whole lot more that they're gonna be able to. And is it for substantive contact? Are you actually doing something on behalf of, for, or with the buyer? You're actually doing it on behalf of, for, and with the seller. You already have a representation agreement in place, which allows that experience to happen. I would say best practice is I am representing the seller, I do not represent you. And by the way, separate, like a lot of this stuff is like, I hope this seeps into new construction. Because there's a part of new construction that, you know, you walk in there and that buyer thinks that this pleasant person is taking good care of them at the sales center and they have no representation and it's on the wall somewhere.
That's actually probably a good
Example.
breakout session to have those, because I contacted you this weekend, because the one-time showing agreement is gone.
No, it's a showing and compensation agreement is what it's called.
I looked it up, it's out of there, because it says, I looked up on North Star MLS, it said this is no longer a document we can support, or something to that effect, and so I was like, oh, shoot.
Showing and compensation agreement isn't.
No,
there anymore?
not the one-time showing.
One-time showing was renamed showing and compensation agreement.
Oh, okay.
And so
Okay.
it's now a meaning, if I show your home with this person, seller, you will pay me because I'm showing this house to this person that I have either in a facilitation agreement or a buyer rep agreement. Okay, so those are used in non-represented seller parties. But it's essentially, it functions the same thing as a one-time showing. They just renamed it. So that is still there. All right, what else? Other topics of, we can jump all over the place. The next thing I'm gonna talk about is wholesaling, and there's also a conversation around the standards that traditional residential real estate is held to compared to new construction. That just irks me, and I just feel that this is another one of those scenarios where new construction may have a leg up if they're not held to the same standards. But it's
Why they
that
never have been is a mystery.
because they have the builder association and
To what degree do we have standards that they don't?
they can post on in a framed print on the wall their agency disclosure.
Okay.
Okay, and there's no expectation that they have to verbalize. As far as I know, There's no expectation that they have to verbalize, and I'm talking new construction sales center, not a residential agent that represents new construction and represents traditional real estate. I'm talking like big box or big enough that they're exclusive to that builder, okay, and there's a sales center. As long as they have it posted on the wall, agency, they have complied with first substantive contact, which I was just in an ethics hearing where the listing agent had on the counter the equivalent of a tish on the counter available for anyone viewing the home. And it was brought into question why the person showing the home and that listed the home wasn't providing it in a handed and verbal and like every possible method to educate the consumer. Like basically shove it down their throat. If you don't do that, you're wrong. And so that's the standard that I'm specifically referring to.
And then off of that, when we're holding open houses, putting the agency on the counter, not good enough for us?
I say it is.
I'm gonna get a framed picture.
No, here's the deal. I believe because it is available, readily available and accessible and viewable, I think it is. But I think there are, on the residential resale side, I think there's questions of, is that enough disclosure on first substantive contact? Is it enough to be laying there, or do you have to actually say like, please review this because it's an obligation by my Department of Commerce to disclose to you your agency options in the state of Minnesota when you come into this home? And again, I say what's sitting there is okay. I was just in an ethics hearing where I definitely got the impression and feeling that there was a lot more expectation for what our obligation is. And again, not everyone's opinion is the same, but when we're being held against a panel of our peers, and those peers think that it's a different way of looking at it, and that we should go above and beyond, or that we should do more than just have it framed on a wall or framed on a counter.
Got it. I want to hear, I'm going to a wholesalers meeting tonight, so I want to hear what you have to say.
All right, anyone else want to talk about anything NAR settlement, to discuss what you'd like to see, we're gonna keep talking about it. No question is a dumb question, a bad question, a silly question. There's a lot of confusing points, and it's April 2nd today. We're gonna know more in May. There's a 2-day convention I'm going to about this whole topic. 2 whole days. Yeah, I'm super excited. One of the days is the Sunday. We're gonna learn more. We're gonna talk about more. We're gonna make sure that everyone feels confident and comfortable, educated, and able to speak to it.
I don't know if this is something to unpack, but it may be answered in form.
Sure.
The concept of the buyer unrepresented and the presumption that, or their motive
Yep.
to be unrepresented is the idea that they may somehow save money
Right.
along the way.
I love this. I just can't wait to answer.
That's it. You can't lie.
I can't wait to answer. I'm like, I just love this because, go ahead.
Did somebody broach this before I walked in?
No.
Okay. Everybody wants to save the same dollar. The way our contracts are written right now is you have an all-encompassing commission and that which is allocated to a buyer broker.
I think buyers have a greater chance of saving money now in a real estate transaction than they will in the future.
This is kind of where I'm going, because I've run in circles on this and I've looked at it from 1,000 different angles, and I haven't come to a firm conclusion of my own just yet. And that makes me wonder what the new documents are going to say, because any way you slice this, there's so
I don't think new documents are going to, I think the new documents are going to clarify things like what the MLS used to clarify. Like, I think there's going to be and I think that the listing agreement is going to stop referencing the MLS, and it's going to say, will you offer cooperative compensation to a buyer agent, or if cooperating compensation is offered to you, will that reduce the buyer's obligation? Like, they'll change the language in the buyer rep agreement, and they'll have a new form that basically says, what sort of cooperative compensation will there be? But in my thoughts, in my head, right now, if a buyer were to come to a listing agent and say, I don't want representation, I want to buy this house, will you write it up for me? And I want the equivalent payout. It's up to the listing agent right now what they would do with that. But there is a allocation of dollars already in contract that get to be discussed, where in the future, if there's no allocation of dollars, no cooperative compensation being offered, and the listing agent is asked to do that, I can see myself as a listing agent having a provision in my contracts moving forward to say, my commission is, I'm just gonna say 4% as a listing agent, and it'll be 5% if a buyer ends up asking me to facilitate a transaction on their behalf, or I'm sorry, or treat them as a customer and write it up. Or if it's a dual agency. And I'm making up numbers right now. I'm not giving out suggestions. But I'm saying, I think the buyers have less of a chance to save money, I think in most scenarios, because saving money, if the money never was discussed, allocated, or, held to the side to pay a buyer broker, there's no money for a buyer to save. And I mean, I would say even right now, there's not very many agents that are willing to be like, I'm gonna do all the work and give you all the benefit.
And there's present day, there's no contractual standing for it, because you have a contract with a all-encompassing commission.
Yeah.
That.
But I think in my role and what I see, we have agents in our office that represent the seller, have 2.7 allocated for a buyer comp. And if a consumer comes to them and says, as a customer, please write this up for me, they will, on their honor, only take their 3.3 or their whatever, for real. But it's they discount it off the price, or they sell the house for the seller and they make the commission that they're going to. And I'm not saying it's best practice. I'm not saying it happens all the time. It just does happen. Have I been asked to do it? Yep, I have been. I've been asked to give up commission. I'm like, I don't know.
It's an easy answer.
It's an easy answer. No.
No.
It's a no.
It's just no.
But I do think there will be scenarios where there are listing agents, because I feel full confident in my value proposition. I will talk right now. I talk to sellers and I'll say my commission is 19%, and it'll be 16% if this scenario happens. Meaning, like, I'm not trying to tell you guys what to do with your commissions. I'm just trying to say that if a buyer comes in and I represent both of you, I'll reduce my commission. Or if I write up a PA for a buyer, I'll reduce the commission. It's been a negotiation tactic I've used, because it doesn't happen very often that a buyer consumer comes and asks me to do anything on the buy side for the seller, but the seller feels like there's a chance they could get a discount. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but literally I've never encountered this. In 15 years, I've never had a seller ask for something after the fact, after the listing, ask for a reduction. And I never had a buyer who didn't accept no. These are not tough conversations.
They're not tough conversations.
You have a buyer with a very simple answer when they say, can you, I'm unrepresented, can you write this up? And can you do it at a reduced commission? I have my brokerage has a contract with the seller.
Yep.
It is independent of anything we are doing here. That is between private party and private party. I can write the offer up for you if that is what you choose, or you can always go find somebody who will represent you.
Absolutely.
It is your choice. Which would you choose?
Well, and really at the heart of all of this, if there are people that are willing to offer a discount or work for free, they're going to work themselves out of a job, because there's not enough income to go around in a discount manner that will keep sustainable. I mean, we're already in an industry where 80% of our population sells less than 5 houses a year. That population will be lucky to sell 1 or 2 in this type of a environment moving forward.
You're gonna have 100 times the number of those conversations now because of the bad information, or because of the discount brokers that are gonna be spreading that.
Which is why you have to have your answer ready.
You have to have your answer ready.
And it can't be a challenging one. It's
respectful, and
you still have a choice.
You've always had a choice.
You still have a choice. Do you want to proceed to writing up the offer at present? Or is there somebody you'd like to contact to proceed as well? Because there's no way you're taking on the liability and the added requirements. And the time and liability, I can't fathom why anybody at that point willfully takes that on. There's no win.
From my vantage
For
point,
anybody, there's no win.
from my vantage point, I know a lot of people when they're newer to the business, they they regard facilitation as a great way to offer a less expensive service. And it's an opportunity to build confidence through experience to say, no, I won't do that. And so when people call me, I'm always like, facilitation is never a great choice. It's never, it's something we support as a brokerage. Do I think it's a great idea? No, never. I really don't. And only because I did it myself once for $1,000 and I looked at it and I was like, what in the hell? Why did I do that? Like, I just gave all my services away for $1,000.
With
Be-
no fiduciaries.
Well, no fiduciary, but I did provide all the fiduciary because I don't know how to turn it off. I don't know how to be an actual facilitator. I'm very bad at facilitating transactions. And now what I say to anyone who calls me about facilitation is the buyer needs to talk to the seller directly and they give you the direction and you write it up. And you get it to the title company and that's the extent of what you do for whatever you're charging. And our office standard or best practice is 1.5%. And when you calculate 1.5% for basically taking instructions from a buyer and a seller on what you're gonna write on a contract and sending it to the title company and the lender, and that's it, that's all you do. It's not really that much of a discount, but when unknowingly agents are providing these fiduciary responsibilities at a discount, facilitator is not a way to provide the same service at a discount. It's just not, it's a poor way of doing it.
And that buyer is going to perceive that you are still representing them.
Absolutely.
They are still going to come back when there's a problem and treat it as if you were.
I actually
Defend that to the hilt.
think that there's gonna be a lot more people in representation contracts for a lot lower commission, just in general, like full representation for lower commissions, instead of 2.7, 2.5, like maybe 2%. You know, we could see a new industry standard for buyer, you know, when a buyer has to come up with the money themselves, in theory. But either way, you guys, we are always justifying our commission and our value. We always have been and we always will be. And because it's not, if you think like there is a group of people out there that represent buyers and they have always charged more than whatever the MLS is paying out. You know, Ivy was talking about, she was on the team and the standard was 3.5 and everyone on the team charged 3.5 to every single buyer. Didn't matter the circumstances. They figured out a way to do it. It has been happening. It's just not as prevalent because, and I do think as much as there can be and will be discount or the theory of having discount brokerages, how much can people live off? How little can people live off of? Because when you start doing like a 1% or $1,000 or whatever, I mean, it's mass chaos and no representation and no risk mitigation and no consultation, no best practices. Again, if that's what the consumer wants, but we're going to have to be better and better in our craft of explaining our value. And I'm in full support of that because I'm already doing it. We should already be doing it. Nothing that's really happening should be really changing our industry. The mechanisms are changing, but the way we do business doesn't necessarily have to. Okay, how about wholesaling? Ready? Okay, so wholesaling. Such a fun topic. I heard about it. I was like, that doesn't make any sense.
Wholesaling.
So there's multiple ways. Okay, let's just start with the concept of wholesaling in general. Wholesaling. Okay, when we all saw the signs posted around town, we buy ugly houses. Anyone ever saw those before? Yep. I had Homestead Road, Minnesota Home Guys, basically, like the Zillow iBuyer program was doing it. There's a bunch of people that were doing wholesaling. So it's a individual person that has nothing to do with being licensed, just a human being, gets in touch with a homeowner or a person of ownership interest on a property and inquires whether or not they'd want to sell. And the owner the ownership interest party or the owner discusses with that human being, having nothing to do with being licensed, what they're willing to sell for. And the person that's offering oftentimes is saying, I will pay you cash. You can leave the home in any condition. And you get to pick when you move out. And usually it's a 30 to 90 day window of moving out. And that buyer writes a contract. That contract looks nothing like a standard Minnesota purchase agreement. It is not a state approved form. It is not created by a real estate agent. It's oftentimes not even created by an attorney. These are personally drafted, oftentimes from copies from out of state wholesale practitioners. And it's a offer to purchase the home from a buyer that's just a human being with no license, oftentimes, and then the seller that has ownership interest in the property. And it's vague and 1 or 2 or 3 pages long. And then that buyer goes out and markets that home that they have a purchase option on the home. And let's say they are paying $100,000 for the home. They go out and they offer to sell to investors, buyers, anybody they can. Traditionally, it's an outside of the real estate licensed market. This is typically outside of us.
Because they're not selling you the house. They're
selling you the purchase
contract.
option. They're selling you the contract. Now, this is gonna get complicated. So you might want to write some stuff down if you want to know about this, and I'm always happy to answer questions about it. But the buyer writes the offer to the seller. The buyer then tries to sell the contract to an interested party. And in an ideal scenario, the interested party is a cash buyer. And if they bought it for 100 the buyer bought it for 100 in the first place, they're going to sell it anywhere between 110 and $200,000. Okay?
As much as they can.
As much as they can. And they know before going in, and I can give you guys the calculations on how they value properties. It's literally like, it's pretty straight across the board with some fluctuations to it. But basically, they look at a property, they see its current value, they discount it by a certain percentage, and then they take off major mechanical expenses on top of that. And then that's what they offer a seller. And typically they make 10 offers before they get 1 purchase contract. So it's a numbers game. They use dialers, they use tax forfeited properties, they use condemned properties, they use just properties that look disheveled and unkempt. And so they oftentimes go after estates, and they're trying to get in touch with people that want quick and easy sales, no showings, no negotiations, just what's the price, what do you pay? Oh, it's cash, great, and let's just move on. And I get to leave all my crap behind, or I get to not have to clean out my mother's home, brother's home, whatever it happens.
It's in no condition to pass
any of anything. Yeah, there's not an inspection, and so that buyer then says, for my time, effort, and energy, I'm going to upsell by 10,000 to 100,000. I mean, it could be anywhere. There's no math. It's all about how much can they get. So they turn around and a lot of the wholesalers have what's called a buyer list that they've marketed. They went out and purchased. Oftentimes it's realtors, because realtors oftentimes have connections to investors. They've also marketed in many different formats like Nextdoor or Craigslist or Marketplace.
In the comments, Callie Haynes used the correct terminology, said assigns the contract.
Well, it assigns when a buyer comes in and agrees to the terms. Yep. But is marketing it as an assignment. It is an assignment of a contract. The assignor is the buyer, and the assignee is the next buyer. And ultimately, at the end of the day, whether it's 110,000 or 200,000, that buyer preferably has cash and comes to closing, and the title transfers from the seller to the second buyer that brought cash. And the title company gives the in-between person the difference between the first purchase contract price and the second purchase contract price. And then that home is oftentimes marketed by that first buyer as to its need for renovations, estimated cost for renovations, and ARV, which stands for after renovation value, which is made of no science or data at all. It's sometimes real, sometimes not, but keep in mind, the majority of wholesalers don't have a license. And I'm just gonna let you guys all know, I would prefer if you have a license that you stay far away from wholesale opportunities because of our code of ethics. And the code of ethics gets really messy when you're dealing with wholesale transactions.
Oh, tonight, I know it's a den of vipers.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to learn.
No, I think it's great. And
I'm familiar.
I'm to each their own. Again, I'm here to help risk mitigate. I'm here to give you best practices. I'm here to advise you on the best way to keep yourself out of trouble.
It's being put on by the Minnesota Real Estate Investors Association tonight. So they're talking about wholesaling.
And I will say that we have transactions that happened in our market center where people didn't know better, didn't know what was happening, and got caught in the middle of it. And so I wanted to at least bring it to the forefront and letting everyone know, well, how do these opportunities work? What do they look like? What to stay away from and why? Why do we stay away from them? Well, when a buyer comes in and writes a purchase contract and let's just say, because wholesalers have started to realize that for them to be successful, the party that has the original contract with the seller, for them to be successful, they're going to have to start offering a real estate commission, and they're going to have to start marketing to realtors so that their network is more vast and they can communicate to the opportunity to more people. But when you're a buyer agent and you bring in a investor client that has cash, because the majority of them cannot get traditional financing, the condition is such that they can't. Sometimes they can, and they'll be marketed differently and the opportunity will be there. But for the most part, they can't. When you as an agent, as a buyer agent, brings in an investor buyer with cash, and then your buyer goes and attempts to assign that contract to the next buyer, the question really is and will be under scrutiny in the coming months and years. What role do you play as that buyer agent? And what obligation do you have to the successive parties in that transaction? Yeah. And it's not as cut and dry as I only represent the buyer, not the buyer's next interest, because they actually don't own the property. The listing agent is still the listing agent. The buyer agent is still the buyer agent. But in some scenarios, when agents are involved, the investor, the buyer investor of the first offer can ask the buyer's agent to open the door for other prospective buyers to have the contract assigned to them. And just like when a seller asks a listing agent to check the thermostat, the answer should always be no way will I ever do that. Never, ever. I will not check the water. I will not check the thermostat. Ask your neighbor. I will not take on that liability. It goes beyond the extent of the agreement, our obligation, and our fiduciary responsibilities. You guys, if we check thermostats and we make sure the water's off and we do all these things, the liability falls on you for the condition of that home.
Because we're acting like property managers at that point.
Yes.
In this case, though, there is no listing agent, is there?
Yeah. Well, there could be. If it's there have been, but the point is in traditional cases, there is no listing agent. But there are scenarios where properties are being listed and then marketed and still could turn into a wholesale deal. But traditionally, there is no listing agent. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that, and maybe that's where I'm confused.
Sorry, I just have a specific scenario that I was thinking of.
My experience in what was called wholesaling was it was two separate transactions where the original purchase was, so the buyer's agent bringing in the investor actually did close on the purchase of the property. 90 days, they invested, upgraded the property to the point where they could sell.
So that's a flip.
Okay.
That's a flip. So wholesale is where, traditional wholesale is where buyer comes in and buys a property from a seller directly. And all they're basically doing is cleaning it out. Because sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes wholesalers don't clean it out, but that's the thing. It's all over the board. Like all the possibilities are open. There's no standard to,
Wild West.
it's the Wild West. So
But the contract is,
the original contract is between the seller and the first buyer. And the first buyer then tries to assign it or sell it to
before,
someone else.
so before the contract is ever carried out, there's another, it's assigned to someone else.
And for the purposes of the discussion, the value we're discussing is in the contract itself, secured by the property, but we're selling the paper.
We're just, that first
Yeah,
buyer is only
right,
selling the
right,
paper
right,
rights.
paper.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. So then there's also the term wholetailing, which is where buyer buys the home from the seller and concludes the transaction and transfers title, and then puts it on the MLS market, which then opens it up to, but the ownership interest changes.
Does happen.
It does happen. That's wholetailing.
That's just buying cheap.
That's buying cheap, putting it on and
That's-
selling higher. Well, it's more desperate for the seller than the buyer.
Why in the hell
You
isn't
would,
the focus of the DOC on that instead of what we're doing?
there's nothing that is being done wrong in wholesaling. It's,
Not technically.
yeah,
To the extent they're behaving like agents.
and that's where it becomes problematic when licensed agents start getting involved. There's a code of ethics and there's a Minnesota state statute that they have to follow. And when standard Minnesota forms come into play, it starts getting way messier because there's inspections and there's code compliance or TISH
Yes.
and everything else. In a traditional wholesale world, none of those things exist or are required.
I just actually had a similar circumstance where a guy came in, called me on one of my listings, said, I'm gonna present a cash offer that was intriguing to my client.
Yep.
But he wanted me to represent both sides. He's not
Dual,
dual.
okay.
And so we started going down the road, and then he said, well, he backed the offer down a little bit, which is fine, but he said, what I want is a contract. I need to have a signed contract, and that'll be held open for 21 days because I need to find a partner to
Partner, Partner.
finish this deal off,
which is, it's
I
basically a veiled wholesale transaction.
So I mean, so you're right, it comes in, at that point, I was like, well, we're not taking off for 21 days, just so you can run around.
Yeah, it's basically like a 21-day contingency
Yeah, and
to
then
sell. Yep.
at the end, we have no earnest money, we have no, potentially, but it's like, no, we're not going now. But he started out that way
He started as a full buyer
as a full buyer.
with not a pre-approval letter, proof of funds.
Well, we just had conversations at that point,
Well, but
Yeah, but he
the
promised, yeah.
the promise to get you the proof of funds, the idea that the buyer fronts as a real buyer, and then it shifts. And this is where, when you're dealing as an agent involved in a wholesale transaction, you might not even know it's wholesale until it's too late. But it's kind of like accepting an offer and never having a pre-approval letter. There's certain things that we've learned in time that you just don't do. Or like, what do you do about a scenario where earnest money isn't collected in a timely manner? What actually happens to the transaction? How much do you enforce it? Do you push it? There's a lot of things that you have to pay attention to because wholesaling isn't regulated, it isn't governed, it isn't managed, it isn't supervised. And that's why a lot of people doing it don't have licenses because it's better for them not to. It really is. And it's fly by the seat of their pants. Not only is their purchase contract to the seller their own contract, but the assignment contract to the next buyer is also their own contract. And it's oftentimes non-refundable earnest money. Doesn't matter. If you don't show up to closing, you don't get this money back. It literally just says this $5,000 deposit is a non-refundable deposit to secure this transaction. And it goes directly to the buyer that had the first contract with the seller, like in their bank account. Well, not really. It goes to the title company, but That's a whole other topic on here about the title companies that are involved in wholesaling. They aren't the traditional title
I'm
companies.
taking a shower after doing that.
It's messy, it's yucky, and it's basically a way for people to earn almost or more the equivalent of a real estate commission for the work that they're doing is finding sellers that are either distressed, upside down, need to cash out,
Really do.
or they are embarrassed. Okay, there's a question that just popped up. Robert, can you read that?
Absolutely. Let's see here. That's why I'm sitting here, yeah.
Thank you.
Callie Haynes, some people are losing their home. Some people inherited a home they do not want. Sometimes there are absentee owners in other states who want to unload the liability. Most wholesale properties are in need of repair, and investors use wholesalers to find them properties in disrepair in order to purchase with cash, oftentimes through private money lending, typical for investors who are flippers.
Yep.
Thank you, Callie.
And it's
I guess her point
But that
there,
involves a licensed agent,
if I understand,
not necessarily.
sometimes.
if I understand what Callie is saying, she's making a case for the utility of this approach and why it would be a
There
good.
can be.
Yeah.
There can be. I can also tell you that we can offer the same service. It's the fact that who gets in the door first.
Yeah.
Because the reality is either I'm earning a commission for offering a offloading of a property, which I don't know. I have a real estate license. I can offload properties. I can market it to lots of people, never have a showing.
Well, Homestead has a billboard in St. Paul
Yeah.
that literally is anti-buyer agent. It says, don't work with a realtor, sell to us.
Yep.
And it's like, well, what's your goal versus what's our goal? And they're opposite.
Well, and the one thing I'll say is Homestead Road is horrible at marketing.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, literally, they're a company that spends lots of money. I mean, this is just me down cutting someone else
They're
for
not
no
brokerage.
reason. Yes, exactly. I know. I can, I will, and I don't care.
It's not Lennar.
And honestly, people are like, I don't even know. At least We Buy Ugly Houses was clear that they're buyers of ugly houses. And I didn't understand the mechanisms and how it all worked at the time. But Homestead Road has these dumb billboards that don't work with a buyer agent, let us buy it directly from you. They look like a real estate company. It's misleading. You have no idea that you can sell a home in disrepair or with garbage up to the ceiling. They don't clearly convey a message consistently. And I guarantee you've all driven around, you've all seen their billboards, and none of you leave with a feeling of, I know who they are and what they do.
And then where that intersects with what we do is the guaranteed offer. That's where the worlds collide.
And that
That's
is,
what
there are
most-
guaranteed offers being offered by listing agents that have real estate licenses that are meddling in the
Actually, putting
world.
a guaranteed offer program together right now.
Yeah. Mhm.
It's just that we're being really honest about it. I bought the URL myshittyoffer.com,
So ethical.
and I wanted to go up front. I own that
Yeah,
and we can use it.
yeah. But here's the deal, you guys. There's opportunity all over the place. People jump on the ship and try to take advantage of the opportunity. So to Kelly's point, is there a need for offloading of houses? Yes. There are multiple mechanisms to do it. Wholesaling is not the only option. Investors love it because they're gonna get the best deal possible. Because once you get education to the seller or the selling entity, the investors have no obligation to be honest with what the value is. They're just making an offer. Does that make sense? That's why when you're a real estate agent, being a buyer of a property puts you in a complicated situation because you have an ethical obligation to educate the consumer as to the value of the home. And when you go in and let's say the value is 300 and you offer 150, there's a conflict there. We're not going to get into the complexities of this, but the point is when you don't have a real estate license, you can go make an offer on any house for any price. And if someone's willing to say, thumbs up, here you go, here's my $300,000 house for 150. Great. And then that person can sell it for whatever they want. They can go sell it for 200,000, make 50 grand. And the next buyer or the assignee is benefiting by $100,000. and they can invest 100,000 in improvements, and the ARV is oftentimes 400,000 after renovation value. So is there a mechanism? Does this mechanism work for offloading? Yes. Is it the only one? No. Because guess what? As a listing agent, I have resources to clean out houses. Can I offer quick sales? Yeah, I can make it happen. I mean, is it going to be exactly the way they want? No. Can they pick their date? No. I mean, but frankly speaking, I've yet to see a wholesale transaction where the first buying party that offers to the seller can actually act on the original terms of the agreement and close and give cash on time, because they're still looking for the assignee to come up with the cash and the closing date. So all they're doing is telling the seller, oh, I'm having some problems with some money. My money's tied up elsewhere. I need another partner. There are podcasts about this topic, and this is being done all over the United States. And there are other markets that have more suppressed real estate that this is happening with. And so they have best practices and ways of doing it. Minnesota did not make this up. Places like Las Vegas did.
Awesome.
Las Vegas, Arizona, Florida, some of the bigger markets for wholesaling.
Right. No more comments here.
Any questions? Any comments? Anything you want to mention? Kathy, you want to say anything?
Yeah, to your point about selling those properties, the properties that are run down, they're boarded up or they're whatever. We as listing agents, I think can be a mindset around, well, we have to find investors to get this done and, look at it like from an off-market standpoint. My experience in dealing with one recently was that and in talking with you, you're like, hey, you can put it on the market. You can show it for a couple hours each day. And I was like, oh yeah, I can. I don't have to have it available all day long or whatever. When you put the house on the market for 2 days and you show it for 2 hours each day, and you get 7 offers on that property, because there are investors out there who will out of the woodwork and they will buy that property, so it doesn't have to be an off-market deal. And at the end of the day, the seller is in better hands and gets a better deal. So I'm just, I think it's very important to kind of look outside of the box and not think that we have to just sell some of these properties that might be in foreclosure, might be, estates are out of state, people just want to dump or whatever. There's opportunities out there, and people outside of just the traditional investor are very much active right now in this community. So
I think that there's a lot of people that don't know that they're investors and that they're watching the market. And if we had, and I will tell you, in addition to that, I think that any property sold in a wholesale environment, the person that loses the most is the original seller, period. Because I have never I've never encountered a property where a seller is getting a fair market value. They're getting an under market value. And the people that are benefiting are the non-licensed people that are, in my opinion, going to be under scrutiny for taking advantage of a seller's situation and circumstance. But when they're not licensed, there's no entity or body to regulate it. If you even suspect it's a wholesale deal, you call me and you ask me and we can talk about it. If you have any questions about it, if you are concerned about it, it's a messy, I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm saying you should stay away if you can. And we need to protect the consumers. That is what real estate agents are designed for, is to protect the consumer.
I'm going to meet investors, basically.
That's great. Good for you. I think we should all educate ourselves, because, like in your experience, you didn't really know what was going on or why they were doing it or what, and you're like, your sellers are still enchanted by this whole cash, certain time frame, whatever. And it's smoke and mirrors.
Well, I hate to say it, but it is one way that our foreclosure rates will probably always stay low for a long time. Because
Yes.
There's all these people out there willing to buy these distressed homes that, had that been really around in 2008, 7, 8.
It was created because of that.
Yeah.
It was
but I'm
literally,
just-
no,
but
you're
I'm
right.
saying that's.
We're not going to see because they can buy it, they can relieve. And then there's a whole nother section of this market that goes from, there's ways of if a buyer doesn't, or if a seller doesn't have any financing on a property, but it's in distress,
Mhm.
you can actually, it's like a contract for deed, but it's without any investment to the seller because the seller doesn't know better. And then there's a way of wrapping, like paying a seller a monthly payment to own a property, improve the property, refinance it to get the seller gone, refinance it and then rent it out. But you're basically utilizing the fact that you're making small incremental payments to a seller and they're ultimately selling it to you at that original value, no title transfer. You renovate the property and then refinance it at a higher value to your personal benefit. It gets, I mean,
Yeah.
buy, renovate, refinance, rent. BRR, that's what the acronym is. If you hear a BRR, if you ever hear that acronym, that's what it stands for, is by. So I don't know if you guys have any other questions, but it's a sticky, icky market. I know we have agents that are involved in it, like personally. If you know how to do it, great, navigate it yourself. If you don't, make sure you got your butt covered because there's a lot of potential visibility on this one. All right, we good?
Perfect.
All right, everyone have a great day. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Two-day affair.
Oh,
Oh, it's local.
it's not.
Yeah. Is it state?
It's about this topic specifically.
In our state, what's how,
Yeah,
okay.
and it's a Minnesota broker convention about that. It's like May 19th and 20th or something, or 19th.
I
I mean,
it's a lot, but I think it's
Well,
necessary.
it'll be very interesting what they will fill the time with.
That's,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
So I don't, and I think it's a Sunday and a Monday.